Hey y'all, I realize there's a thin line between putting your hand in the cookie jar and causing your unconscious cruelty. See, the things that are inside of that cookie jar, there's always a indication of what's in that cookie jar. Even if there's a sign on there saying do not touch, don't eat. You know, the fact that we're being limited to doing something that really we can do physically within our own free will, we still want to put our hands in that cookie jar. Sometimes we get blinded to the things that we're really trying to be protected from. God protects us from faltering in particular ways, having particular types of iniquity, because this is what happens when you put your hand in the cookie jar. You're going to end up with your hand in the mousetrap. First of all, whoever created that sign saying don't touch, doesn't matter if there's cookies in there or not, nobody should put their hand in that cookie jar, right? But then we put our hand in that cookie jar anyway, because all we know is it's a cookie jar, got to be cookies in it. Somebody is saying don't touch it. It's probably plenty in there to where I would get one and no one would notice, right? But that's also being sneaky. Moving on though. But that's another weakness. That's another iniquity. That's another way to falter off of impulse. Sometimes we are driven by our impulses. But this is where unconscious cruelty also kick in, okay? Because first of all, certain things get introduced to us. We get enticed. We feel like we want it. We build a desire for it. And then we make our own free will decision, executive decision, to go for that thing. Not realizing that even though we have the power of our own free will, that means God has the power to help us learn a lesson, you know? So just because we have a power of our own free will, we don't realize that sometimes the circumstances are for God to allow whatever happens, happen. Because when he puts a hedge of protection on us and we sitting there with a nail and a hammer saying, I gotta see what's on the other side, God is like, okay, fine. I know you did that for the intention to make this hedge of protection crack. So there you go. You got a crack. Now you get to see the water leaking. Now you get to see what it's like to have to tread water. Now you got to know what it's like to be in survival mode because you made a move that was anti my protection of you, right? And a lot of people, they are unconsciously cruel to their situations and circumstances, all because they want to hide behind the balance of their bank accounts. They want to hide behind the titles and promotions at work. So there's a lot of people that are nose blind. You know what nose blind is, right? That's like when you go inside of a house. Some people that lives in this house and they have a particular stench when you walk in, right? They have this particular stench and you're like, man, it must have been a while since they cleaned up their house. You might want to rub your nose. You don't want to give it away, because then, you know, people get offended. People are highly sensitive these days. They don't want you to tell them what the problem really is. When you see that problem and you see it in your vortex, you're thinking to yourself like, okay, this is the problem that I'm seeing. This is what I'm smelling. This is what's happening. And I hate to tell you, but I'm only saying it because I love you. You have neglected it, right? And when people neglect their homes, they get nose blind to it. They knew that it was there first, but they decided to neglect it instead of taking advantage of the indicator that if this goes neglected, if this gets unacknowledged, if this constantly gets ignored, a situation is going to arise to where now you have to deal with the neglect. You have to deal with the aftermath of neglecting this thing that should have been acknowledged and tended to, right? It's the same thing when some people are spiritually blind, consciously blind, cognitively blind, and blind to their own behavior. They're blind to their own impulses. They're blind to their own desires. They're blind to their own iniquities, their own ways of faltering. They're so blind to it because, like I said, they hide behind the bank account, the titles, the accolades. This is why I make it my business to remind people, don't put me on a pedestal. Don't do it. Because you, at some point, you're going to get to know me more than you last know me, than you last saw me. And eventually, it's going to be something you rather disagree with or not going to like. And as we all know, us all as human beings, we all have this trait. We all have the ability to have something a part of us that somebody is not going to like. Right? So you watching right now, you might love everything that I'm saying right now. You might have loved everything I said thus far. But who's to say that later on down the line, you ain't going to like what I say eventually in that one little segment, in that one particular clip of this particular segment, whatever the case is. I can't control that. I can only be Jasmine, right? And I can only expect you to be you. Whenever you decide to engage, and whether you do or you don't, I have to accept that, right? Because our humanity calls in or gives us the permission to respond how we choose to respond, right? It's no different when we get into a situation and we see something is seriously wrong, something really need to be acknowledged, something really need to be taken care of, intended to, talked about. You know, maybe there's a room for intervention. These are rooms of opportunity. Some people don't want to accept those rooms of opportunity because they don't want to accept your wisdom. They don't want to accept your rebuke. They don't want to accept any of those things. They just want to do what they want to do. But that's because they're nose blind to their spirituality, their impulses. You understand, their iniquities, their weaknesses, you know? And they're surely blind to the thing that God already warned them about need to be acknowledged before it got to a neglectful state, right? But these are the type of people that we're going to start seeing in the next day and age. Starting 2025, I'm going to tell you right now, if we don't see nothing else, we're going to see a lot of people that call themselves men and women of God, and they're going to have a warning before the destruction. Not only that, but there's going to be a lot of people, because it's already happening, right? But there's going to be a lot of people that we never expected, right? Because they look like they really got something going on in that pulpit, right? But with that smoke screen up, it's easy to believe that's a man and woman of God. I can't be a woman of God or think I can give you an example of a woman of God if I'm a whore. You know what I'm saying? If I wore extremely tight contour dresses. I'm not against anybody that wear that. But if I'm supposed to be an example, I have to give an example of modesty. I have to give an example of a lady. I have to give an example of holiness. I have to give an example of humanity. I have to give an example of relativeness. You know, I have to give an example of holiness. I have to give an example of righteousness. I have to give an example of what it's like to trample over spiritual warfare, or what it's like to operate in spiritual immunity, like Psalms 91. What it's like for when the Spirit of the Lord to lift up a standard against the enemy when he comes in like a flood, right? Being that example to help you understand why it says in Matthew 5:5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. You know, and behold, Satan leaveth him, and angels came and ministered unto him. We got to be able to crack the code of temptation. How is anybody else supposed to do that if we don't give the example and people are looking at us? And all it takes is one evening and getting to know us, and they realize that we are drunk. They realize that we smoke weed. They realize that we, you know, that we tooting it up for anybody that wants it. That's not godly. And as much as we like to fool man and believe that this pedestal is never going to be knocked down at the legs, because those are the very ones that's going to falter, and it's going to be the ones we least think are going to suffer this way. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. So when it happens in 2025 and in the upcoming years, you know how warning is going to come before destruction. 2024 is just a warning. Whoever wasn't exposed in 2024, between 2025 and 26, they will be. And that's going to be because they didn't take 2024 as their warning. And once they get exposed, they're going to have a Diddy situation. This is not that type of platform, but they're going to have a Diddy situation. As soon as there's proof of something, they go into the big house. In the spirit, of course. Because we can't possibly believe that we get to live a double lifestyle, fooling man while we know we can't fool God. And then expect ourselves to make it to the pearly gates and actually be able to enter into the gates of heaven with our able. And expect God or Jesus not to say, Away from me, I never knew you, you worker of iniquity. Instead, we want to go in there entitled like we were in the world. But the spirit world is not the natural world. If we believe in the spirit world that we preach about, we have to remember that when we get to them pearly gates, what we expecting to say is, well done, thy good and faithful servant. But a lot of us are not going to hear that because we're workers of iniquity. How do you know you're dealing with crooked people, you know, workers of iniquity? And these are supposed to be men and women of God. I'm going to tell you this and I'm going to go away. You know you're dealing with a worker of iniquity by this one particular indicator. A high turnover rate if they have a ministry. Because most of them are so out of touch that they lose relationships. They lose connections. Because they never committed themselves to operate in covenant or covering. Got to be a commitment after there's a connection, right? And after a commitment, there must be a covenant so that there can be a covering. And even though I may be a part of a different culture, you could be a part of a different culture. The fact that we're both human beings, which makes us creatures. We're creatures, a part of a different culture. We still have to cover each other because we're supposed to be in covenant. We cannot do that if there's no commitment. And how can you be committed to someone without a connection? All of these things matter when it comes to loving and covering each other as creatures, a part of a different culture. But we can't lock arms and fix the issue of mankind. There's a scripture in the Bible, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought into the obedience of Christ. There's a lot of people that's in a fantasy world. They truly believe that just because this is what they're living, that this has to be God's will. And it's not God's will at all. What we don't want to do is find out the hard way. Us being men and women of God, God is going to give us even a harsher lesson so we can have more value and weight on the word and wisdom that we give when we're helping another person. If it's truly in our heart to do so, we will share it and we won't put a price tag on it. Because the word out of exhortation, following that is salvation. And last time I checked, I ain't never had to pay for salvation. So I never will ask you to pay me for it either. So I hope that blesses you as much as pondering all of those things blesses me. If you would like to follow me, if you would like to send me any content, you want me to part 2 this, please email me at a.w.a.y.k.i.n.4@gmail.com. And if you don't remember my name is Miss Awaken. And if we forget the increment, it's ancestry, worth, acclimate, yield, kinship, I love you, and never judging. And as I always say, I hope that blesses you as much as pondering all of those things blesses me. I love every single one of you. God bless you, and God keep you.